Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, your resource for all things business, brand, and leadership. We are excited you have decided to join us today.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I am your host, Robert Kaelin. Mike Newman isn't with us today, but we have the awesome privilege of having American actor Tommy Snider with us, who you may have seen in things like as the bearded hunter on HBO's Doom Patrol, or Jody on the award-winning Fox series Baskets alongside Louis Anderson and Zach Galifianakis. He also happens to be my brother. And today I want to introduce Tommy Snider. Hey, Tommy, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we were talking a little bit before we jumped on here just about the need for getting on the same page. And, you know, in your world, you're acting, you're directing, it's so clear that everything that you do revolves around communication and the need to get people on the same page. That goes like totally towards a leadership side, but it also is just like specifically in communication. Tell our audience a little bit about what you do and maybe some of the challenges that you've had with communication to bring you where you are right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, like Robert mentioned, my name is Tommy. I'm his brother. And I moved to Los Angeles from Puyallup, Washington, about 21 years ago.
Where I'm shooting this show.
Right.
That's where I'm shooting right now.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
About 21 years ago. It was 21 years ago. And yeah, growing up, it's interesting how much the communication skills have developed since I moved. When I was growing up, I was never a good student in school. I found it very hard to understand a lot of times what the teachers wanted of me. And so I would get an assignment and I wouldn't understand what it was that I needed to do. And so I would just ask, I would say, hey, I don't understand. And then the teacher would always usually just kind of double down on what they'd already said. They wouldn't re-communicate it in a different way. And I can think of an exact instance where this happened when I was learning multiplication.
Yeah.
And I was told it's just 7 times 4. And I remember thinking, times, what does time have to do with the numbers? So I'm overthinking it, and nobody explained to me what that meant. And it kept me from learning. And so you ask a few times and you still don't figure it out. I just pretend and go, okay, got it, thanks. And then just fail every assignment.
What's funny about that is it's almost like learning a second language. When you are learning something for the first time, and to bring time back into it, when you're learning something for the first time, it's like learning a second language and being exposed to things that you have no clue what they are.
Yeah.
I can think of when I started working at Microsoft, and they've got like an acronym for everything, and not knowing, like, some of them are the same acronym and they mean 2 different things. So you have to understand it in the context in which they're saying it.
Right.
And I'm like, I have no clue what they're talking about, but I'm just going to pretend like, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so coming out of that, not being a good student, I moved down to Los Angeles at 19 and began my career as an actor, where everything was a hands-on experience. And so instead of somebody telling me how to do anything, I never took acting classes other than drama in high school, which, didn't really teach me much, but I never took classes for anything, and everything that I make an income on now is all based on things that I've self-taught myself, which is really kind of interesting. But I've learned a lot about communication and how important that is because of my life experience.
And that's such a great illustration for us of, like, learning something on the job or being hands-on with it so that you do learn it, because we don't necessarily learn from being educated on something. We learn by doing. College is a perfect example. You could be book smart and you can be the top of your class, and as soon as you get into your industry, you're like, whoa, I thought I knew what I was doing, and I have maybe overly confident in it, but my competency is really low.
Yeah. Well, and I find it's just kind of interesting too, because as you're leading people. So if I'm on a set as an actor, I'm a piece of the puzzle. If you're directing something, you're the leader of the ship, and in that you have to have good communication skills. And what's really important is being able to recognize how other people process things. I've noticed working for directors, some are not good communicators, and you don't know what the assignment really is. And when you don't know what the assignment really is in anything, you're not going to be able to efficiently do the job. But for me, that's helped. That's also showed me, it's given me an education that stepping into that leadership role, how can I be a better communicator? So for me, I'll ask questions. Like, what is it that you think about this? What do you think it is that I'm asking you? And if I understand, if I can recognize, oh, they're seeing blue when I want them to see red, well, I have to re-illustrate what I'm saying. So that's, being a leader in that has definitely taught me also a lot about communication.
Yeah, I think that kind of reminds me of like George Costanza. When he started out in Seinfeld, he thought he was playing Woody Allen and then realized he was actually just supposed to be Larry David.
Right.
Right. And that moment of, oh, now I get it. If you look back at original season of Seinfeld, he's definitely imitating Woody Allen.
Yes.
And there was a shift in there where he understood his character.
Right.
And that communication that needed to happen during that first season, I'm sure was a challenge that Larry David and him had.
Right, well,
Jason Alexander.
Yeah. And I mean, I could even tell you this, like going back to a set experience. So there's PAs that are production assistants. And PAs basically do all kind of the dirty work of gathering things up, running errands, making lunch orders, all these kinds of things for a set when something is in production shooting. And a lot of times what's communicated to them is not all the information. So I've been a PA, and that experience is like, hey, I need you to go get the case of water from the van. And you search everywhere in the van for the case of water, and it takes you 25 minutes. And the person communicating the information forgot to tell you it's under the driver's seat, which would have taken 2 minutes. And then they're giving you a hard time because why would it take 25 minutes to find a case of water? So communication is so important. It's so easy when you're in a position of leadership to look down at everyone else and go, why aren't they getting the job done? I made it crystal clear. But the reality is sometimes you're not giving all the information, and sometimes they're misinterpreting the information that you're giving them. So yeah, communication is key.
That's good. And I think all of us, all the listeners out here who have their own businesses or are starting their own business or have a side hustle, who are leading anything, in our own communication, I'm sure we can think of places where we've had a miscommunication and thought it was them, but it was really us. And so I think a lot of times that's a good reminder for us to just look in the mirror first and be like, okay, what did I say? What could have been the miscommunication? Where did we go off the rails here? Because something clearly happened. Either I did a bad job or they interpreted it different than I meant it because it was too broad.
Definitely. Well, and even in that leadership position, when you put emotion and a lot of feeling into what you're doing, sometimes that can be communicated badly because you're putting so much pressure on someone. You're breaking down their ability to process your request, even if they've made a mistake. It's also why it's so important to be understanding and empathetic when you've got people working under you, because most times people that are working under you want to impress you. They want to do the job good, but if they're treated poorly, you might get more people with poor performance because why go the extra mile for this person that doesn't even recognize it or something like that. You know what I mean?
Good. Yeah. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And the moment we recognize that for ourselves and we look inward, like our growth is going to mean business growth. Our personal growth means my organization can grow because I can lead it there. So I know you've had a lot of experiences in acting specifically where a director will give you a note, but then they'll also give you another note and another note and another note. How do you deal with someone who over communicates or maybe tries to get a very specific thing without communicating it directly?
Well, I would definitely say that in my experience, less is always more. Oftentimes when you're getting too many details about something. I think it's good to get your point across, obviously, but in my experience, you hire competent people. The people that you bring on board, unless they're training, they don't need over explanation. And sometimes when you over explain, there are things that get lost. But when you keep it simple, so in my experience, the more experienced the director, the less they say. Because you understand what your rhythm is, you understand what your job is, and now you just need somebody not micromanaging that. You need to be able to go out and just do it. And then there are less experienced directors. I've had, like, I can think of plenty of times. There's a time when I had to do a scene where I'm supposed to be emotional. And that takes a very specific part of your brain that you've got to go to make that real. I'm not going, my dog is dead, and then just pretending. I have to think about things that are going to trigger emotion in me. And then I've got the director coming up going, okay, this is a sad scene. I want you to remember. And I'm like, I don't need, and I didn't say that because I'm trying to be respectful, but like, you talking to me right now is only robbing me of what I'm about to do for you. So I don't really need that. So a lot of times just trusting in who is working for you to do the job, and, you know, if they have questions or whatever, hopefully the people that are working for you are competent enough to ask a question if they don't understand. But sometimes it doesn't need a lot of over explaining, and that can throw things out of whack too. So you got to find a balance.
For sure. And that kind of reminds me back to your, multiplication thing, getting on the same page. Sometimes it's just defining the terms.
Totally.
Like you're thinking times means time, like in a clock.
Yeah.
And they're saying it's just a multiple.
Right.
You know?
And the fact that wasn't broken down, I didn't know there were multiple meanings for that word.
Right.
So what am I to do? And I asked, and it's still being explained the same way. So I think that's important too. It's, if you do have somebody that's working for you. Sorry, my camera just fell out of its holder. If you have somebody that's working for you and they ask you a question that you've already clearly explained, that's a good opportunity for you to ask them questions. What is it that you're not understanding, so that you can articulate it in a way that they can comprehend it? Because we're all thinking differently. Yeah. We're all experiencing life differently. And communication is always the key to getting to coming together and getting that result you want.
Right. Yeah. And you just said something that kind of sparked an idea in me of, like, getting into someone else's head, being able to see the process. I had teachers growing up that would, like, they were strict on, write down your math problem. Like, what are you doing? Because I need to be able to see where you're going wrong.
Right.
Right. Whereas, when you're teaching somebody something or trying to pull out something in somebody, and if they're not understanding it, how do you actually do that? I know you said you ask questions, but, like, what kind of questions can we ask people when we're trying to do that?
So I'll give you an example. For me, I also do acting classes, and I will give my actors a scene, and they've got to put an audition on tape. And I'll give them a little explanation of who their character is and what the project is. And then it's their job to take that little piece of script and to translate something. And so what I always do is I always ask questions. When you're in a position of leadership, it's really no different than being a doctor asking someone what their symptoms are. When it comes down to communication error, it's the same kind of thing. The best doctors aren't going to just, you walk in the room and you're like, my throat hurts. And he's like, it's strep. You're like, well, can you check? He's going to say, does it hurt when you swallow? Or, like, have you been sneezing or whatever? So for me, I always ask what their process is. What was it that you were thinking when you read this information? And I think it's going to be different depending on the field in which you work and who your employees are or employer. But ultimately, questions are always good, and it's always good to check emotion at the door and maybe not double down on what you feel before you ask questions and get a better sense of what's going on. Because that's another thing, is ultimately you'll have some people that maybe just aren't a good fit. Maybe they're not good listeners. Maybe they can't, or they're not stepping up enough, and you can recognize that in repetitive behavior. But most times people want to go with the flow. People want to do good and be told they're doing good. And so even for you, giving them an assignment and then affirming that they did it right is only going to produce more productivity in the future.
That's good. Good leaders ask great questions. And that's a great spot for us to end for our listeners out there to then think about all the things that you're leading right now and the questions that you can ask to your employees, to your vendors, even take this back to your family because it works everywhere. Good communication is about getting on the same page and being on the same page. I think a lot of times we are operating in completely different books like you were describing there. And it's really important for us to get on the same page. So thanks for sharing all your insight and wisdom and being here with us today.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
And it's always good to connect with you. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, you guys, hey, that is it for the Elevate podcast today. But we will see you next week. Until then, take care and God bless.
Thank you for joining us. Our hope is this episode has been helpful for you today. If it's impacted you in some way, we encourage you to share it with someone. To receive a direct notification of our next episode, click the follow button on your favorite app or platform. You can also watch each episode on YouTube. The links are in the description. If you want to connect with us on a deeper level, go to countercultureleadership.com/resources. We'll see you next week on the Elevate Podcast.